Hi guys, it's Natalie. Today we're going to be talking about dreaming big in ministry, how to honor God by asking big things, and doing so particularly through the use of the leadership tool known as B.H.A.Gs. B.H.A.G is an acronym for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals. And today what I want to do is be able to show you examples in both scripture and tradition on how leaders in ministry, leaders in the church, use this tool in order to accomplish great things. And I want to show you warnings from scripture on how some B.H.A.Gs go very, very wrong. And also too, I want to show you the examples also from scripture and tradition of B.H.A.Gs that were done right and that propelled ministry forward in a way that changed lives and changed eternities. Let's get started with a scriptural example of how a B.H.A.G went wrong. Example number 1. The whole world had the same language and the same words. When they were migrating from the east, they came to the valley of the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us mold bricks and harden them with fire." They used bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky, and so make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered all over the earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the people had built. Then the Lord said, "If now, while they are one people and all have the same language, they have started to do this, nothing they presume to do will be out of their reach. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that no one will understand the speech of another." So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the speech of all the world. Let's break this down. First, the people of Babel had the right idea when it comes to B.H.A.G. They had a really audacious goal of building this beautiful giant tower. Where did they go wrong? Number 1, they weren't aligned with the will of God. They had this beautiful, awesome, great idea, but they didn't talk to Jesus about that. Don't make the same mistake. When you're setting your B.H.A.G, go talk to God and make sure that it is aligned with His will, and you do that through prayer. Number 2, check out their reason for why they wanted to build a tower in the first place. They wanted to build a name for themselves. This is really important as a leader. Are you, out of your pride and ego, setting this big, hairy, audacious goal? Is this about you, or is it about the mission and about God? That's an important question, and you need to ask it. All right, let's go to scripture example number 2 of B.H.A.Gs. Conquering of Canaan. Now, when Moses leads the Israelite people out of Egypt, God promises them that He will give them a land flowing with milk and honey. There's just one little problem. The land's already occupied. It's already filled with native tribes and people. The Israelites have to go in and they have to conquer the land, which is a major B.H.A.G. And we can learn from their example things that they did right, but also things that went very wrong. Let's start with the things that they did wrong. Here's the third reason B.H.A.Gs go wrong. Fear. In Numbers, chapters 13 and 14, you can see this story where Moses sends out 12 spies into the land of Canaan, and they wander around for 40 days before they come back and make their report. And 10 of those spies came back like literally shaking in their boots and saying, "Oh, the men in Canaan are like giants compared to us, and we are merely grasshoppers compared to them." Those stories and that fear pervaded the Israelite camp, and the Israelites chose fear. This fear so angers God that for each of the 40 days that the spies were in the land, He punishes the Israelites by having them wander for 1 year in the wilderness. 40 years of wandering until the cowards started dying off. All the cowards die before they enter into the promised land. Do you know who were the only ones who survived? Joshua and Caleb. They were the only ones who didn't give into that fear, and God rewards them by allowing them into the promised land. When you're setting your B.H.A.G, don't let fear keep you from setting a big goal. If God is with you, He will make this happen no matter what giants you're going to be facing. Reason number 4 that they failed in their goals. They didn't take into account the gifts and strength that God had given to them. And this is something that you as a leader can do. When the Israelites gave into their fear, they didn't realize their military strength. They didn't appreciate how God was coming behind them and the miracles that He was going to work in order to accomplish this huge goal. They gave into that fear. You can do this as a leader. You can actually underestimate the gifts, talents, and resources of your team and what's available in your area in order to accomplish a major goal. Don't underestimate what God has given you. But on the flip side too, you really need to know those gifts and talents and resources in order to prudently make a decision, because you don't want to overestimate in a B.H.A.G as well. And that is a careful balancing process. And that's why it takes prayer and discernment, but also prudence and courage when you're discerning on how to create a B.H.A.G that is not going to overdraw on your resources, but also not underestimate what exactly you and your team are capable of doing. Don't make the same mistake of the Israelites by underestimating your gifts and talents. The exciting news for the Israelites is that finally you see in the book of Joshua how they start crossing over into the promised land, and they actually start tackling this major goal that God has given to them. And one of the things that we learn, a warning, is that even though they initially go in with a lot of enthusiasm and passion, reason number 5 B.H.A.Gs fail is laziness or a lack of commitment. Because even though they start really strong, they start tapering off. Particularly, they stop putting people under the ban, which was the commandment that God had given to them, meaning that more of the people are going to start intermarrying. This leads to a lot of pagan influences and a lot of things that, as we see later in the Old Testament, is going to start drawing the people away from God. But it was that laziness and lack of commitment that started, and you can see that in the book of Joshua, where they just slowly, just barely start tapering off their commitment, and they don't fully commit to conquering the whole land of Canaan. And that actually is number 6. They don't actually reach the finish line for the B.H.A.G. And as a leader, that's something that you just need to push all the way through. Don't stop just before you get to the end of that big goal. Go all the way, because the Israelites didn't. They didn't fully commit to conquering the entire promised land, and it created enormous problems and difficulties that you can see throughout the Old Testament. Just a lot of conflict, a lot of pagan influences, a lot of difficulties arise because they didn't follow through on this big, audacious goal that God had given to them as people. Let's start talking about how the Israelites actually got some of the goals right and what contributed to some of the success of those goals. And number 1 would be great leadership. Those goals actually started with the leadership and authority from Moses and Joshua. And the thing that you really need to pay attention to is that Moses is the one who, through prayer, proposes that they're going to go and conquer the land of Canaan. And that goal survived the transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua. That is what a great B.H.A.G is going to do. It's not going to stop with just one leader. It involves the whole team, it involves the whole community, and it transitions easily from leadership to another. You can even see with Joshua, at the end of Joshua, that he does transfer the goal to the elders in the community. You can see in the book of Judges that there were some leaders who were able to take up that goal and continue and move it forward, although they weren't quite able to do it as well or with the same level of commitment as Joshua and Moses. But a good B.H.A.G is going to be born from great leadership and prayerful discernment, and it's going to be able to survive leadership transitions. The other thing that they got right was that their goal was in line with their core ideology. They set out to conquer the land of Canaan, which is the promised land. They did not set out to conquer Egypt. That also would have been a big, hairy, audacious goal, seeing how it was the world's power at the time. But that was not what was in line with their core ideology. It was not in line with the will of God. They didn't even attempt it. And so they set the right goal, which again, I don't think it's a coincidence that that goal was set in prayer. Make sure when you're setting a B.H.A.G that it's in line with your core ideology and with the mission of the ministry. You cannot separate the two. So with those examples from scripture, I actually want to jump forward a couple thousand years in order to talk about how big goals are still used in the church and by saints in order to continue propelling ministry forward more effectively. And the example that I want to use is a B.H.A.G that actually was thrown down by the Virgin Mary herself. This example actually happens roughly 500 years ago when Mary appears to a poor man named Juan Diego with this request: I want very much to have a little house built here for me, in which I will show him, I will exalt him and make him manifest. I will give him to the people in all my personal love and my compassion and my help and my protection, because I am truly your merciful mother, yours and all the people who live united in this land, and of all the other people of different ancestries, my lovers who love me, those who seek me, those who trust in me. Here I will hear their weeping, their complaints, and heal all their sorrows, hardships, and sufferings. And to bring about what my compassionate and merciful concern is trying to achieve, you must go to the residence of the Bishop of Mexico and tell him that I sent you here to show him how strongly I wish him to build me a temple here on the plain. Now that is a B.H.A.G. That is a big, hairy, audacious goal. I'm going to approach this very poor man who has no power, who has no education, and ask him to go to one of the most powerful men in the land in order to request that a cathedral would be built on this lonely, isolated spot so that I can touch and transform the hearts of the people through my son here in this place. And frankly, it worked. The bishop, through the various miracles that happened in that situation, listened to Juan Diego, and they built that cathedral, and they hung the image of the Virgin Mary in there. And because it incorporated imagery from the native cultures and sent powerful messages of healing and hope to the Aztec people, there's an estimated 6 million Aztec people who converted because of that incident. So this is what I'm going to say. If Mary herself is throwing down those kind of goals, is throwing down those kind of B.H.A.Gs, I think that that's a pretty legitimate tool that we as leaders in ministry, so long as our goals are united to the will of God, should also be setting big, hairy, audacious goals and just going big in order to serve God and His people. So go do it. Go pray. Go talk to God about goals. Go look at the resources of your team and decide what can we legitimately do that's going to push us to the very nth degree so that we can go out and change lives and change eternities. This is something to get excited about. This is something that maybe you were created to do. Go out and do it and know that God is with you. It's exciting. It's beautiful. And it works. All right. Do you have a big goal? Write it down below. Let us support and encourage you. And in the meantime, like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and know that I'm praying for you. God bless, and I'll see you next week.